I'm so glad you're here. My name is Natalie. I'm 69 years old, and I've spent my entire life believing that family was a sanctuary. I learned the hard way that sometimes the greatest danger is the one you invite to your own dinner table. While my dear husband Ernest lies helpless in a psychiatric hospital, my own son and his wife decided it was the perfect time to make their move. This past Thanksgiving, in front of our oldest friends, they slid legal papers across the table and told me to sign away my home, or they would have me declared mentally incompetent. They saw a tired, grieving wife, an easy target. They had no idea that my husband had left me one last weapon to protect myself. If you want to hear what happened next, please give this a like. I truly want to know how far my story of justice has reached, so tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The silence in this house has become a different kind of weight since Ernest went to Bright Meadows. It's a silence filled not with the finality of loss, but with the unending ache of waiting. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and the weak autumn sun does little to warm the living room, which smells of lemon polish and Ernest's old books. I smooth the front of my apron, my heart doing a familiar, worried flutter as I hear my son Mark's car pull into the driveway. I glance at the photo on the mantelpiece, Ernest and me, 20 years ago, beaming on our anniversary. He always said, "Live simply, Natalie. True wealth isn't what you show the world." His words were our guiding principle, our shared secret. I never understood how much I'd need that strength until now, as I brace myself for the polite, shallow currents of my son's visit. The doorbell chimes. I open it to find Mark looking at his shoes, already avoidant, while his wife, Hannah, offers a smile that is bright but doesn't touch her eyes. She is polished and perfect, a stark contrast to the comfortable weariness I feel in my bones. "Mom," Mark says, finally looking up. He gives me a quick, hesitant hug, his gaze already drifting past me toward his father's empty armchair. "It's so good to see you, Natalie," Hannah says, her voice smooth as honey as she steps inside. Her eyes, however, are not on me. They are doing a quick, sweeping inventory of the room, lingering on the oak china cabinet. "Oh, that piece is just divine. With the market for antiques being what it is, I wonder what something like that might be worth." I force a small smile. It's worth a lifetime of memories to me. We settle in the living room, the conversation stilted. They talk about their financial pressures, a new theme in our recent talks. "This economy is just brutal," Mark sighs, while Hannah nods sympathetically. She subtly guides the conversation, her words like carefully placed stones leading to a river she wants me to cross. "And the bills from Bright Meadows. We're just so worried about you having to handle all of this on your own, Natalie." The visit lasts less than an hour. Mark grows restless, mumbling about an early meeting. As they prepare to leave, Hannah wraps me in a stiff hug. "We'll get through this," she whispers, a promise that sounds more like a threat. Mark just mumbles an excuse about being busy, his eyes fixed on the front door. It's as they are stepping out that Hannah pauses, looking back at the house. "A home this large, it's a huge asset, you know," she remarks, her tone dripping with feigned concern. "It could really secure Ernest's future care. Have you ever had it professionally appraised?" The question hangs between us, cold and clinical, stripping our home of its warmth and reducing it to a number on a spreadsheet. After the sound of their engine fades, the silence returns, heavier than before. I walk back into the living room to plump the cushions on the armchair where Hannah sat. My fingers brush against something soft and foreign. It's her scarf, an expensive silk thing. As I pick it up, a crumpled piece of paper falls into my lap. It's a receipt, Monroe's Fine Jewelry. The date is from last week. The total makes my breath catch in my throat, $4,250. The smell of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie filled the house, a scent that should have meant comfort and gratitude. But this Thanksgiving, all I could feel was a cold knot of apprehension. The silk scarf from the other day was tucked away in my dresser drawer, a silent, ugly secret. As I basted the turkey, my hands moving with the practiced ease of 40 years of Thanksgiving preparations, Chloe's parting question about selling the land echoed in my mind. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of intent. My son, Mark, arrived with his wife, Hannah, just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. With them were the Pattersons, our old family friends, who greeted me with warm, genuine hugs that felt like a lifeline. Hannah, however, was a whirlwind of manufactured charm. She wore an elegant cashmere sweater that must have cost a fortune and immediately took over, arranging side dishes and complimenting my cooking with a voice that was just a little too loud, a little too sweet. "Natalie, this cornbread stuffing smells divine. You simply must give me the recipe," she gushed. Mark, meanwhile, retreated to the living room with Mr. Patterson to watch the football game, his shoulders tense, his relief at escaping the kitchen palpable. We sat down to dinner, the table groaning under the weight of the feast. For a while, things felt almost normal. We shared stories. The Pattersons asked about Ernest, and I gave them a carefully edited update, focusing on his stability rather than the cavernous void his absence left. Hannah steered the conversation, a masterful conductor of a symphony I didn't want to hear. After praising my turkey, she let out a theatrical sigh. "You do so much, Natalie. Honestly, I don't know how you manage it all." She paused, ensuring all eyes were on her. "And with the costs at Bright Meadows being what they are, it's just astronomical." The air grew thick. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Hannah seized the moment, her voice dropping to a tone of deep, counterfeit concern. "Mark and I have been thinking a lot about the future," she said, looking around the table as if sharing a profound family decision. "Selling this house would solve everything. Mom could move into a lovely, smaller apartment, something more manageable, and we would have a significant fund to ensure Dad gets the absolute best care for the rest of his life." A hot flush of shame and anger crept up my neck. She had laid her cards on the table in front of our friends, using my husband's tragic condition as a bargaining chip. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to intervene, but he just stared at his plate, mumbling, "She has a point, Mom. It makes financial sense." Mr. Patterson, a man who had known Ernest since they were boys, finally spoke up, his voice gentle but firm. "But is that something Ernest would have wanted?" Hannah's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned to ice. "He's not in a position to decide anymore," she said, the casual cruelty of her words sucking the warmth from the room. "We have to be the rational ones now." The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced conversation and hollow pleasantries. The Pattersons left early, their goodbyes filled with a sympathy that only deepened my humiliation. After the door closed, Mark stayed behind, refusing to meet my gaze. He stood by the fireplace, tracing the patterns on the bricks with his finger. "Mom," he began, his voice low and strained, "please just think about what she said." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were filled with a misery that almost broke my heart. "Hannah has already spoken to a lawyer. They mentioned seeking guardianship for Dad. They say it's the best way to protect the family's assets." The two words, guardianship and assets, looped in my head all weekend, a cold clinical threat that was far more chilling than the November wind rattling the window panes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's pained expression, a puppet mouthing words that were not his own. My son, my gentle son, was now the messenger for a war I hadn't known was being waged against me. My eyes kept drifting to Ernest's study, to the heavy file box his lawyer had given me, still sitting on the corner of his desk. The answers I needed were likely in there, but a deep-seated fear kept me from opening it, a fear of confirming that the family I knew was truly gone. Hannah arrived midweek, on a Wednesday, under the guise of dropping off groceries. She breezed into the kitchen, placing a bag on the counter that contained 2 cartons of milk and a single loaf of bread, hardly enough to justify the visit. I watched her from the doorway as she moved about the space with a proprietary air, her movements quick and purposeful. She rearranged the spice jars, placing the cinnamon where the salt always went. She moved my favorite teapot from its spot by the stove to a high shelf I couldn't easily reach. Later, as I was looking for the sugar, I couldn't find it. "I'm sure I left it right here," I muttered, checking the counter. "Oh, Natalie," Hannah said with a patient sigh, retrieving it from the pantry. "You put it in here yesterday. Remember, are you sure you're feeling all right? You seem a bit forgetful lately." I knew for a fact I hadn't. It was a small lie, a tiny, deliberate act of gaslighting meant to unmoor me. That evening, she insisted on having a friend over for dinner, a man named Dr. Evans, who she introduced as a psychologist. He was charming and polite, but his questions were relentlessly probing, disguised as casual conversation. "So, Natalie, what was the name of that wonderful actor in that old movie you love?" he'd ask. "And what year was it that Mark first broke his arm?" I felt like a specimen under a microscope, and the pressure made me stumble over answers I knew perfectly well. The next day, Mark called. His voice was thick with a rehearsed concern that made my stomach churn. "Mom, Dr. Evans was a little worried about you. He told Hannah you seemed stressed, maybe a little overwhelmed. He said it's common." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Maybe you should let Hannah and me handle the bills and paperwork for a while, just until you're feeling more like yourself." It was the first direct move to seize control, a soft invasion cloaked in the language of care. "I'm perfectly fine, Mark," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Later that night, as I was washing the dinner dishes, I overheard them talking in the living room. Hannah wasn't bothering to whisper. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "I'm telling you, Mark, if she keeps acting like this, so defensive and paranoid, the court will see she's not fit to care for Dad. They'll appoint an outside guardian, and then we'll have no control at all. We have to get ahead of this." The sink filled with water, but I stood frozen, the dishcloth dripping in my hand. It was all there. The cold calculation, the utter lack of love. It wasn't about my well-being or Ernest's. It was about control. It was about the money. The next evening, I went to retrieve the mail, my hands still trembling slightly from the memory of their conversation. Among the usual bills and junk mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the letterhead of a downtown law firm I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I tore it open. The language was cold, formal, and utterly terrifying. It was an official request on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Mark Hayes that I voluntarily submit to a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation to determine my ongoing competency. The lawyer's letter sat on my kitchen table like a verdict already delivered. Comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. The words were a declaration of war, and for 2 days I did nothing but stare at them. A knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Every time the phone rang, I flinched. Every car that slowed on our street felt like a new threat. I was a prisoner in my own home, waiting for the next assault. My gaze kept falling on the closed door of Ernest's study. The heavy file box was in there, a silent testament to his foresight. But the thought of opening it, of facing the truths it might contain, felt just as daunting as the legal battle Hannah was forcing upon me. They didn't wait for my reply. On Saturday morning, just after 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was Hannah and Mark, and standing between them, looking grim and official, was Dr. Evans. This time, he was carrying a leather briefcase. I opened the door only a few inches. "What do you want?" Hannah pushed the door open the rest of the way and breezed past me into the living room. Mark followed, his face a mask of misery. "Mom, we received no reply to our lawyer's letter," Hannah said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "So we're here with Dr. Evans to conduct a few small cognitive tests. It will be quick, and then we can all move on." She gestured to the dining table as if inviting a guest for coffee, not preparing for an interrogation. Dr. Evans opened his briefcase, revealing stacks of papers and assessment forms. He no longer wore the guise of a friendly acquaintance. He was all business, his eyes clinical and detached. "Natalie," he began, "if you would just have a seat, we can begin with some simple memory exercises." Something inside me, a long dormant coil of defiance, finally snapped. "You will do no such thing," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the air, silencing all three of them. "This is my home. You, Dr. Evans, are not my physician, and you are not welcome to practice medicine here. And you, Hannah, are no longer welcome to bring strangers into my house to ambush me." I pointed to the door. "I want all of you to leave. Now." Hannah's face, a carefully constructed facade of concern, crumbled into raw fury. She threw her hands up in the air, turning to Mark with a triumphant, venomous glare. "You see? This is exactly what I was talking about. This irrational hostility, this paranoia. It's proof that she isn't well. She is a danger to herself and to Dad's care." Mark, who had been standing by the entryway like a statue, finally moved. He took a step toward me, his face etched with a deep, heartbreaking sorrow. It was the face of a son who knew he was about to betray his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice heavy with resignation, "please, don't make this harder than it has to be." He couldn't look me in the eye. "If you don't cooperate with Dr. Evans, we'll have to file the petition with the court. We'll have no other choice. It's for your own good." The ultimatum, delivered by my own son, was the final blow. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. They left after that, the threat hanging in the suffocating silence of the room. I didn't watch them go. I walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my body trembling. But it wasn't with fear anymore. It was with a cold, clear rage. He had made his choice. They had drawn their line in the sand. Now I would draw mine. With steady steps, I walked directly into Ernest's study. The room smelled of him, of sawdust and old paper, a scent that had always been my comfort. I placed my hands on the cool metal of the file box. "All right, Ernest," I whispered to the empty room. "It's time." The silence in the study seemed to hold its breath as my trembling fingers fumbled with the cold metal latch of the file box. It clicked open with a sound that was unnervingly loud, breaking a stillness that had lasted for months, ever since Ernest had been taken to Bright Meadows. The air inside smelled of him, of sawdust, old paper, and the faint, clean scent of the soap he always used. For a moment, grief washed over me so intensely I had to steady myself against his desk. I took a deep breath and began to sort through the contents. It was a lifetime of careful planning, all in one place. There were thick stacks of financial statements, incomprehensible legal documents filled with jargon like beneficiary designations and fiduciary duties, and old tax returns dating back to 1995. I felt a wave of helplessness. Ernest had always handled these things, protecting me from the cold, hard numbers that governed our lives. Now I was adrift in a sea of them, searching for a lifeboat. My fingers brushed against something different. It wasn't a standard file folder, but a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a drop of wax. In Ernest's familiar, strong handwriting were the words, "For Natalie, for when you need me most." My heart constricted. This was it. This was what he had left for me. My hands shook as I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of his personal stationery. The date at the top was from 6 months ago, just 2 weeks before the breakdown that had sent him away. "My dearest Natalie," it began, "if you are reading this, it means my fears have come to pass, and I am no longer able to protect you myself. I hope this letter finds you well, but I suspect it will find you in a time of trouble. For months now, I have been worried. I have seen the look in Hannah's eyes when she looks at our home, at our things. It is not the look of a loving daughter-in-law. It is the look of an appraiser. I have seen how she influences Mark, twisting his love for us into a sense of burdensome duty. He is a good boy, our Mark, but he is not strong like you. Hannah's ambition is a current too powerful for him to swim against. That is why I had to do something. They will pressure you. They will talk about money, about selling the house, about my care. They will try to make you feel old and confused and alone. They will use your love for me as a weapon against you. I have set things up with our lawyer, David Miller. He holds all the cards, Natalie. He has the documents that will protect everything we have built together. If they ever push you, if they ever make you feel small in your own home, you must call him. He knows exactly what to do. He will explain the power of attorney and the trust I established. Everything is designed to give you the final say. The letter blurred through my tears. He had known. He had seen it all coming and had tried to protect me from beyond the fog that had claimed his mind. I read the final lines, his handwriting growing slightly shakier, as if written with great urgency. Do not trust her tears, my love. Trust in what I have done. I have given you all the power. A wave of profound love and sorrow washed over me, but beneath it, something else stirred. A nascent, steely resolve. He hadn't left me defenseless. He had left me armed. I folded the letter, holding it to my chest, feeling his strength flow into me. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks began to recede, replaced by a quiet, burning anger. Just then, the phone on his desk shrilled, jolting me from my reverie. I looked at the caller ID. It was Mark. With a steady hand, I picked it up. Mom? His voice was hesitant. Good, you're up. Listen, I know it's late, but Hannah went ahead and scheduled a realtor to come by tomorrow morning, just for a casual appraisal, to see what our options are. Casual appraisal. The words were so deceptively simple, but after reading Ernest's letter, I knew they were the first shots fired in an undeclared war. They thought they were giving me a warning. In reality, they were giving me a deadline to prepare my defenses. I barely slept, Ernest's letter lying open on my nightstand, his words a silent, guiding presence in the dark. The next morning, at precisely 9:15, the phone rang. It was the realtor, a man with a brisk, cheerful voice named Mr. Henderson. Good morning, Mrs. Hayes. Just calling to confirm our 10 o'clock appointment tomorrow to take a look at your lovely home. I took a breath, summoning a voice I didn't recognize as my own, the voice of a frail, uncertain woman. Oh, yes, hello, Mr. Henderson. 10 o'clock will be fine. I paused, as if gathering my thoughts. I do have one small request, however. I'd be much more comfortable if my son, Mark, and his wife, Hannah, could both be present. This is such a big family decision, you see. Of course, absolutely, he replied, his tone accommodating. I'll give them a call to coordinate. See you tomorrow. I hung up. The first move was made. The next was more important. My finger, now steady, dialed the number from Ernest's letter. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Law offices of David Miller. Hello, I said, my own voice returning. This is Natalie Hayes, Ernest's wife. He left a letter. He said I should call you. There was a brief, respectful silence on the other end. Natalie, I am so very sorry for your loss. Ernest was a fine man. I've been waiting for your call. His voice was a balm of competence and kindness. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 3 o'clock. I believe we have much to discuss. With the meeting secured, it was time for the performance of a lifetime. I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. Mom? I let a waver enter my voice, a convincing tremor of exhaustion. Mark, honey, it's me. I let out a long, shaky sigh. I've been thinking all night. I'm just so tired, Mark. So tired of fighting. Mom? Are you okay? The caution in his voice was now tinged with a flicker of hopeful interest. No, honey, I'm not. I'm old. This big house... I let my voice trail off, then added with a whisper, Maybe you and Hannah are right. It's too much for me. Perhaps I should start thinking about moving. The bait was laid. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the quick calculation of victory. The silence on his end was filled with a palpable sense of relief. "Oh, Mom," he finally said, the warmth in his voice now sounding genuine because it was born of success. That's wonderful. I mean, it's for the best. We're only thinking of you and Dad." "I know, dear," I whispered, closing my eyes to focus on the lie. I was just being stubborn. It's hard to let go. "We understand," he said quickly, eagerly. "So, you'll meet with the realtor tomorrow then? It's just a first step." "Yes, Mark," I said, the picture of defeated compliance. "I'll meet with him." I hung up the phone, the sound of my son's relief still echoing in my ear. I stood in the quiet of my sunlit kitchen, the room that they wanted to take from me. A cold, thin smile touched my lips for the first time in months. "Oh, I'll meet with him," I whispered to the empty house. "I'll meet with all of you." Stepping into David Miller's office felt like entering a fortress. The heavy oak door closed behind me, shutting out the city noise, and for the first time in months, the gnawing anxiety that had become my shadow. The room was lined with books, smelled of leather and clean paper, and exuded an aura of quiet, formidable competence. A man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a sharp suit rose from behind a large desk. "Natalie," he said, extending a hand, "I'm David Miller. I'm so very glad you called." His immediate warmth was a relief. I sat in the plush chair opposite him, placing my handbag, which now felt impossibly heavy with Ernest's letter inside it, on my lap. "My husband, Ernest," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "He left me a letter. He said that if I was ever in trouble, I should call you." David nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of sympathy and a knowing sadness. "I know. He was a very wise man, Natalie, and a very worried one. He came to see me several times in the months before he was admitted. He wanted to make sure you were protected." He swiveled in his chair and pulled a thick, leather-bound portfolio from a locked cabinet behind him. He placed it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. "Ernest was afraid this day might come," he said, opening the portfolio. "He saw the way Hannah looked at your life's work and he didn't like it. So, we put some safeguards in place." He slid the first document across the desk. It was a durable power of attorney. "This, Natalie, gives you sole, irrevocable legal authority over all of your and Ernest's joint assets. While he is incapacitated, you, and only you, can make financial decisions. Mark and Hannah have zero legal standing to touch a single penny." I stared at the document, at my husband's strong, familiar signature at the bottom. It was a shield he had forged for me. "But this," David said, tapping a second, much thicker document, "this is the masterpiece." It was the irrevocable trust agreement. Ernest placed everything, this house, the savings, his stock portfolio, all of it, into this trust. You are the sole trustee, which means you manage it. But the brilliant part is what we called the poison pill clause. He pointed to a specific paragraph, and I leaned in to read. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, but David translated it into plain English. "It stipulates," he said, his voice calm and precise, "that you are Ernest's designated caregiver, and this house is your designated primary residence. If any beneficiary, namely Mark or Hannah, initiates legal action to have you declared incompetent or takes any action that would result in you being forcibly removed from this home, they are immediately and permanently disqualified as beneficiaries of the trust. Their entire inheritance is automatically forfeited and redirected to the American Heart Association in your husband's name." The air left my lungs. I read the paragraph again, the words finally sinking in. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. The very act of trying to steal everything from me was the one thing that would guarantee they got nothing. "He thought of everything," I whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. "He loved you very much," David said gently. "Now tell me what they've been doing." I explained everything. The pressure, the gaslighting, the visit from the fake-friendly psychologist, and the impending Thanksgiving dinner. As I spoke, a plan began to form, a way to use the very stage they had set for my humiliation as the platform for their downfall. David listened intently, a grim smile forming on his lips as I finished. "Thanksgiving, it's perfect. A family gathering with witnesses." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a legal battle already won. "Natalie, Ernest foresaw all of this. He built you a legal shield of iron. The harder Hannah pushes, the more she ensures her own spectacular destruction. You are holding all the aces." As I stood to leave his office an hour later, the fear that had hunched my shoulders for weeks was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was the guardian of my husband's legacy and the executor of his final brilliant plan. "David," I said, my voice steady for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Please have certified copies of everything ready for Thanksgiving Day." His smile was firm and reassuring. "They're already in my briefcase." As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I thought of the upcoming holiday. This Thanksgiving, I promised myself, will be one for the history books. For the next 2 weeks, I became the finest actress Hollywood had never known. I buried the woman who had walked out of David Miller's office, the one filled with cold resolve, and resurrected the version of myself that Hannah and Mark expected to see. A tired, confused, and defeated old woman. It was a draining performance, but every feigned sigh and trembling hand was a step toward a victory they would never see coming. My first move was to feign surrender. When Hannah came by the following afternoon, armed with a fresh stack of glossy brochures for luxury retirement communities, I didn't argue. I invited her in and let her spread them across my coffee table like a general laying out battle plans. "Oh, these do look nice," I said, my voice intentionally frail. "There are so many choices. Hannah, dear, you have such good taste. Could you perhaps help me look through them? I find all of this so overwhelming." The look of triumphant pity in her eyes was almost nauseating. "Of course, Natalie," she said, patting my hand in a patronizing gesture. "That's what I'm here for. We'll find the perfect place for you." She spent an hour detailing the benefits of scheduled activities and on-call nurses, completely oblivious to the fact that I was studying her, memorizing the shape of her lies. My next step required Mark's unwitting cooperation. I called him on a Thursday evening, catching him just as he got home from work. "Mark, honey," I began, injecting a note of manufactured anxiety into my voice. "I've been feeling so nervous lately, being all alone in this big house. I saw an advertisement for one of those simple home security systems. Do you think you could help your silly old mother install one? Just a couple of small cameras. It would make me feel so much safer." The hook was perfectly baited with his own narrative about my supposed paranoia. "Of course, Mom," he said, his voice softening with a wave of guilt. "That's a great idea. I'll come by this weekend." He helped me install them himself, 2 small, discreet cameras, one tucked between the books on the living room bookshelf, the other nestled within the leaves of a large fern in the study. He had no idea he was setting up the very stage for his wife's downfall. The final piece of my performance was a carefully timed phone call. Knowing Hannah was due to arrive to help me sort through old photos, I dialed my friend Joan Patterson. I spoke loudly, my voice cracking with emotion as I stood in the hallway, well within earshot of the front door. "I just don't have the energy to fight them anymore, Joan." I sighed into the receiver. "I'm so lonely here. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's for the best." As I hung up, Hannah walked in, a smug, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had heard every word. That night, after she and Mark had left, I sat in the darkness of my study and reviewed the footage from the security cameras. My hands trembled as I watched Hannah alone in my living room, believing I was napping. She was on the phone with Mark, her voice dripping with contemptuous victory. I hit record on my own phone, capturing the video playing on my screen. "See," she said, her back to the camera as she paced in front of the fireplace. "I told you. All it took was a little firm pressure, and she folded completely. She's asking me, Ahas, for help choosing her new cage." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "It's almost done. The house will be ours before Christmas." I watched the recording 3 times, each viewing hardening my resolve. The pain was still there, a deep primal wound from my own son's betrayal, but now it was forged into something else. It was fuel. I turned off the tablet, the final piece of evidence now secured. The stage was set. The trap was laid. All that was left was to send out the invitations to the final act. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady and sure. The first call was to Joan. "Joan, it's Natalie. I was wondering, are you and Bill free for Thanksgiving dinner this year? I have some very important family news to announce." The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock sharp on a Tuesday morning. On the small tablet connected to my new security cameras, I watched the realtor, Mr. Henderson, adjust his tie. He stood on my porch with a professional smile, a man about to do his job, entirely unaware that he was merely a pawn in a game he didn't know was being played. Hannah was right behind me, her posture radiating an eager, proprietary energy. "I'll get it," she said, brushing past me before I could move. She opened the door with the grand air of a lady welcoming a guest to her own estate. "Mr. Henderson, so glad you could make it," she beamed. "Please come in. This is my mother-in-law, Natalie." I extended a trembling hand, a deliberate part of my performance. "So nice to meet you," I murmured, looking down at the floor as if overwhelmed. There are so many people in my house these days. Mr. Henderson gave me a polite, slightly confused smile and turned his attention back to Hannah, who had already launched into her role as the capable, in-charge decision-maker. As he began his walkthrough, clipboard in hand, I followed a few steps behind them, a ghost in my own home. I made sure to seem thoroughly befuddled. When he asked about the age of the roof, I frowned and said, "Oh dear, the roof? Ernest always handled those big things. Was it 2003 or 2005? Hannah swooped in with a patient sigh. "It's fine, Natalie. I have all the paperwork. The roof was replaced in 2007. She gave the realtor a look that was a perfect blend of exasperation and familial duty. "See what I'm dealing with?" I shuffled into the kitchen behind them and, as if reaching for a glass, my hand accidentally knocked a small ceramic salt shaker off the counter. It clattered to the floor, thankfully not breaking. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, my hands flying to my face. How clumsy of me. Hannah's response was immediate. "Don't worry about it, Mom. I've got it," she said, her voice tight with annoyance as she bent to retrieve it. She was playing her part beautifully, showcasing my supposed incompetence for our audience of one. She took over the tour completely, her voice confident as she pointed out the features of the house as if she had designed them herself. "We plan on knocking down this wall to create a more open-concept living space," she announced in the dining room. I said nothing, but my heart ached. That was the wall Ernest and I had put up ourselves the year Mark was born to create a small nook for his crib. When they reached the backyard, Mr. Henderson's professional demeanor brightened. "Well, the lot size is certainly the main selling point here," he said, making notes. "In this market, with the right buyer, a property like this has tremendous potential." Hannah's eyes lit up with a greedy, unconcealed fire. "And what kind of price would you estimate that potential at?" she asked, her voice sharp with anticipation. He stroked his chin. With some of the updates you've mentioned and given the location, I'd say you could comfortably list this for around $750,000. The number hung in the air. For me, it was the sum of a lifetime of work. For Hannah, it was the sound of a jackpot. She could barely contain her glee. She turned to me, her smile wide and victorious. "Did you hear that, Natalie? 750,000. That would be more than enough to set you up in a wonderful community and take care of Ernest's needs forever." She shook Mr. Henderson's hand with a firm, decisive grip. "That's wonderful news," she said, her voice leaving no room for doubt. "We'll be completing the necessary legal paperwork very soon. Hopefully you can find us a buyer quickly." She said "we," and in that single word, she had erased me completely. After Mr. Henderson left, his car pulling away from the curb, Hannah turned to me. The triumphant gleam in her eye was replaced by a familiar, condescending softness. She patted my arm, a gesture meant to soothe a confused child. "You heard the man, Natalie. It's for the best." She paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "You should probably start thinking about packing a few things. Things are going to move very quickly now." I just looked at her, my eyes downcast, and gave a slow, weak nod. Before the final battle, I needed to visit my sanctuary, the one place where love remained pure and untainted by greed. The drive to Bright Meadows the day before Thanksgiving felt different. The familiar route, usually a path of sorrow, now felt like a pilgrimage. I was no longer a grieving wife seeking solace. I was a soldier reporting for duty. I walked down the sterile, silent hallway, my footsteps echoing with a purpose they hadn't had before. In his room, the steady, rhythmic beep of the monitors was the only sound. Ernest lay still, his face peaceful, a world away from the storm that was about to break in his name. I sat in the worn vinyl chair beside his bed and took his hand. It was warm, limp, but it was still the hand that had held mine for 42 years. This time, I did not cry. The woman who had visited him weeks ago, lost and terrified, was gone. In her place was someone steeled by the knowledge of his love and foresight. I leaned close, my voice a low, steady whisper against the hum of the machines. "Ernest, my love," I began, my thumb stroking the back of his hand. "It's all happening, just as you feared it would. Hannah, she's pushed and pushed. She thinks she has won. She brought a doctor, a lawyer, a realtor. She believes I am a confused old woman ready to be put out to pasture." I paused, gathering the threads of the past few weeks. "But I found your letter, my darling. I read your words. I did as you asked, and I called David." A small, grim smile touched my lips. He explained everything. "The power you left me, the beautiful, perfect trap you set for them. You truly thought of everything." I told him about my performance, about my feigned confusion and staged surrender. I told him about the security cameras Mark had unknowingly installed for me, and I told him about the plan for the following day. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, Ernest. They will all be there, at our table, in our home. Hannah will think it is her final victory. She and Mark will deliver their ultimatum, expecting me to crumble. They will demand I sign the papers that would give them control of everything, that would put me out of my own home." I squeezed his hand gently. "You gave me the tools, my love. You gave me the power you spoke of in your letter, and tomorrow at our Thanksgiving table, I am going to use them. I am going to honor you. I am going to protect what we built." As I spoke the words aloud, a profound sense of peace settled over me. So deep and unshakable, it felt as though Ernest himself was breathing it into me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about honoring the man who had loved me enough to protect me even after the light in his own mind had dimmed. I knew, with a certainty that resonated in my very bones, that I was doing exactly what he would have wanted. I leaned forward and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to his cool forehead, his skin soft and familiar under my lips. A single tear, not of sadness but of gratitude, escaped and fell onto his pillow. "I promise I will protect everything we built together, my love," I whispered. "I promise." As I stepped out of the facility a half-hour later, I took a deep, cleansing breath of the crisp November air. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the gray turmoil of the preceding months. I felt calm. I felt ready. "Tomorrow," I said to myself, my voice a quiet vow against the wind. "Tomorrow it all ends." The golden brown turkey sat in the center of the table, a perfect illusion of the happy family I knew was about to be carved apart. Its skin was crisp. Its aroma filled the house with a nostalgic lie of warmth and unity. Outside, the November air was sharp and cold, but inside, a different kind of chill had settled over the dining room. Our old friends, the Pattersons, sat trying to make pleasant conversation, their smiles strained. And at the end of the table sat David Miller, whom I had introduced as an old and dear friend of Ernest's. He had a quiet, watchful presence, a silent ally in a room full of enemies. Hannah was a portrait of smug success. She played the gracious hostess to perfection, refilling wine glasses and laughing a little too loudly, but I could see the triumphant gleam in her eyes. She thought this was the final act of a play she had written and directed. Mark was a ghost at his own table, pale and silent, his food barely touched. He avoided my gaze, his guilt a heavy shroud around his shoulders. I, on the other hand, was eerily calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving a quiet, hard center of resolve. I ate my dinner slowly, methodically, waiting. After the pumpkin pie was served and the coffee was poured, Hannah stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a spoon, the sharp ping silencing the strained chatter. She was holding a thick manila folder. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she began, her voice dripping with a practiced, solemn sincerity. She looked around the table, her gaze pausing on each guest before finally settling on me. "As you all know, our family has been going through a very difficult time, with Ernest's condition and Natalie's increasing fragility. Mark and I have been forced to consider the future." She placed the folder on the table with a soft thud. "Out of our deep love and concern for both of them and for the security of the family assets, we have had to make a very difficult decision." She slid the folder across the polished wood of the dining table until it stopped directly in front of my plate. Then she produced an expensive-looking fountain pen and placed it beside the folder. "Mom," she said, her voice now a soft, condescending coo, "we need you to sign these. It's a petition for guardianship and a power of attorney. It's just to make things official. So Mark and I can properly manage Ernest's care and your finances without any legal hurdles." She smiled sweetly. "Sign it, and this can all be over. We can be a proper family again." The room was utterly still. Joan Patterson gasped softly. David Miller simply watched, his expression unreadable. I looked at the papers, then at my son. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were full of a desperate, miserable plea. "This is it, Mom," Mark said, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying the weight of finality. It was the line she had fed him, the one he had rehearsed. "This is the ultimatum. You either sign this tonight or we will see you in court tomorrow." The threat, delivered so publicly, so cruelly, hung in the air. This was the moment they had worked towards. My final humiliation, my complete surrender. Hannah's smile widened, certain of her victory. I looked from the papers to the pen, then back to their expectant faces. I did not cry, I did not argue. Instead, I gave a small, serene nod, as if considering their offer. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, I pushed the papers and the pen back toward the center of the table. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice startlingly clear and calm in the tense silence, There's a short home video I'd like for all of us to watch, something to remember Ernest by, for old time's sake. Before anyone could object, I reached for the small remote I had placed beside my plate. I aimed it at the large television in the adjoining living room, my thumb hovering over the play button. Every eye in the room followed my movement, their faces a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and for Hannah, the first faint flicker of unease. The screen flickered to life, not with the grainy, cheerful chaos of a past family vacation, but with a clear, steady shot of me, sitting in Ernest's study. I looked tired. Yes, the strain of the past few weeks etched on my face, but my eyes held a resolve that no one in that room had ever seen before. My recorded self looked directly into the camera, her voice filling the silent room, calm and measured. "I am making this recording on Wednesday, the 26th of November," she began, "as a matter of personal and legal record." In the video, I picked up a thick, bound document. "This is the irrevocable trust agreement established by my late husband, Ernest Hayes. I would like to read a specific section aloud, Article 9, Section 4, Subsection B." The camera zoomed in on the page, the text clear and undeniable. My voice from the speakers was unwavering as I read the dense legal prose. When I finished, the on-screen me looked up again. "For those who may not be fluent in legalese," my recorded voice explained, the calm delivery making the words all the more devastating. "What this means is very simple. It means that any attempt by a beneficiary to have me declared legally incompetent, or any action that results in my forced removal from my home at number 123 Oak Street, will trigger this clause. The consequence is the immediate, permanent, and irrevocable disinheritance of that beneficiary. Their share of the entire trust, the house, the savings, the stocks, everything, is to be immediately transferred to the American Heart Association." A collective gasp went through the room. Joan Patterson's hand flew to her mouth. Mark stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. Hannah's expression was one of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. But I wasn't done. "Furthermore," my voice continued from the television, "I would like to present evidence of such coercive actions." The screen cut abruptly to a new image. It was the footage from the hidden camera on my bookshelf. The room watched in stunned silence as Hannah, believing she was alone, paced my living room while on the phone with Mark. Her voice, crisp and clear through the TV speakers, echoed her own smug pronouncement. "See? I told you. All it took was a little firm pressure and she folded completely. It's almost done. The house will be ours before Christmas." The scene shifted again, this time to footage of the realtor's visit. The guests now saw Hannah, the confident lady of the manor, telling Mr. Henderson, "We'll be completing the necessary legal paperwork very soon. Hopefully, you can find us a buyer quickly." The video ended. The screen went black, plunging the room into a silence so profound I could hear the frantic pounding of my own heart. Hannah was the first to break it. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Her face was a mask of livid fury and panic. "She's lying," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "This is a trick. Those papers are fake. She made it all up to ruin our lives." She looked around desperately for an ally, but all she found were the shocked and accusing faces of our guests. That was David Miller's cue. He rose slowly from his chair, his movements calm and deliberate. He walked to the dining table and, from his briefcase, produced the original, notarized, leather-bound portfolio of the irrevocable trust. He placed it on the table with a soft but heavy thud that seemed to echo like a gunshot. "Everything is perfectly legal, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice cutting through her hysterics with the cold, sharp edge of the law. "This is the original, executed by my late client, Ernest Hayes, 2 years ago. And our friends here," he said, gesturing calmly to the Pattersons, "are now witnesses to your attempt tonight to coerce my client into signing a legal document under duress." Hannah froze, her mouth open, the denials dying in her throat. She stared at the official document on the table, then at David's implacable face, and finally, at me. The color had completely vanished from her face, leaving behind a pasty, white mask of horror. Mark, who had been paralyzed in his chair, slowly turned his head. He looked at his sobbing, defeated wife, then at me, his mother, sitting there in quiet, unassailable strength. The full, catastrophic scope of the truth finally crashed down upon him, and his voice was a choked, broken whisper. "Hannah, what have you done?" The silence that followed Mark's question was more damning than any accusation. It was the silence of absolute collapse, the sound of a world built on lies shattering into a million pieces. Hannah stood frozen, her face a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief, a stark contrast to the smug confidence she had worn all evening like a royal mantle. The color had not returned to her cheeks. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and was about to crack. It was Joan Patterson who spoke first. She rose from her chair, her kind face now rigid with a disgust she made no effort to hide. She looked directly at Hannah, her voice trembling with indignation. "Hannah," she said, and the name was an indictment. "I have known this family for over 30 years. I held Mark in my arms when he was a baby. To see you do this to his mother, a woman who has been nothing but good to you, it is shameful. Absolutely shameful." Hannah flinched as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to retort, but no sound came out. David Miller took that moment to deliver the final legal blow. He calmly picked up the legal documents Hannah had brought and placed them neatly on top of the trust portfolio. "Furthermore," he announced, his professional voice carrying a weight of finality that was absolute, "given the clear evidence of attempted coercion presented here tonight, an act witnessed by everyone at this table, I will be filing a petition first thing tomorrow morning to enact Article 9, Section 4 of the Trust." "As of this moment, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," he said, looking from Mark to Hannah, "you can consider your status as beneficiaries of the Hayes Family Trust to be officially and permanently terminated." The word "terminated" hung in the air, cold and sharp as a guillotine's blade. The reality of it finally broke through Hannah's shock, and she dissolved not into quiet tears of remorse, but into a tornado of furious, desperate sobs. She whirled on Mark, her hands balled into fists, her face contorted with rage. "This is your fault!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You were supposed to handle her. You were supposed to be strong, but you're weak. You've always been weak, letting your mother walk all over us." For the first time in his marriage, a different man stood in my son's place. The years of quiet compliance, of weary resignation fell away. His face, which had been a canvas of horrified shock, now hardened into a cold, unfamiliar fury. "My fault?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "I trusted you, Hannah. I believed you. You told me this was about protecting my father, about helping my mother. You looked me in the eye and you lied every single day." He took a step toward her, his body trembling with a rage I had never seen. "You didn't just lie to me. You used me. You used my love for my parents to try and destroy my mother. You are the one who is weak." The ugly, venomous exchange continued, their whispered plots now a public screaming match. The guests, our friends, sat in mortified silence, averting their eyes from the raw, catastrophic implosion of our family. I had seen enough. I rose from my chair at the head of the table. My movement was quiet, but it commanded immediate silence. Hannah's sobs hitched in her throat. Mark's angry tirade stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to me. I looked around the table, at the remnants of our ruined feast, at the shocked faces of my friends, at the shattered pieces of my son and his wife. "The dinner is over," I said, my voice clear and steady, betraying none of the roiling emotions inside me. I looked at the Pattersons, at David, at the others. "Thank you all for coming." I paused, then met their eyes, one by one. and for bearing witness." They left without another word, gathering their coats in a clumsy, hurried silence. No one offered condolences. No one said goodbye. They just slipped out into the cold night, leaving the wreckage behind. Hannah grabbed her purse, her body shaking, and stumbled toward the door. Mark stood motionless for a moment longer, looking at me with eyes so full of pain and shame I almost looked away. Then he, too, turned and followed his wife out into the darkness. The front door clicked shut behind them, the sound echoing in the now cavernous-feeling room. I stood alone in the center of the living room, the smell of turkey and betrayal thick in the air. For the first time, standing in the rubble of my family, I wasn't sure if what I felt was the triumph of victory or the hollow ache of loss. The next morning, the house was unnaturally quiet. It was not the lonely silence of grief I had grown used to, but the clean, crisp silence of a storm that had finally passed, leaving a strange and fragile peace in its wake. The chaotic remnants of the previous night's dinner, the abandoned plates, the half-empty wine glasses, the damning legal documents still sitting on the table, were a stark reminder of the wreckage. I spent the morning methodically cleaning, each swipe of the cloth an act of reclaiming my space, my home, my life. Just after 9 o'clock, the phone rang. It was David Miller. His voice was professional, but I could hear a note of gentle satisfaction in it. "Natalie," he said, "I wanted to let you know. I filed the petition with the court first thing this morning. I've also sent a formal certified notice to Mark and Hannah's last known address. As per the explicit terms of the trust, their beneficiary status is officially revoked. They will not receive a single cent." "Thank you, David," I said, sinking into a kitchen chair. The confirmation was a relief, a solid legal end to a long, emotional war. "The Pattersons have also agreed to provide sworn affidavits about what they witnessed," he continued. "Hannah's legal position is, to put it mildly, non-existent." We spoke for a few more minutes, but my mind was elsewhere. The legal victory felt hollow in the face of the personal loss. I had protected my home, but I had lost my son. An hour later, as if summoned by my thoughts, the doorbell rang. I looked at the security camera feed. It was Mark. He was alone, and he looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His suit from the night before was rumpled, his hair was unkempt, and his face was pale and puffy, his eyes red-rimmed from a night without sleep. I opened the door. He didn't try to come in, just stood on the porch, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mom," he began, and his voice cracked, a raw, broken sound. He couldn't seem to say anything else. He just stood there as tears began to stream down his face, silent, shameful tears. I said nothing. I simply waited. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time, and I saw a depth of pain and regret that was utterly genuine. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words choked with sobs. "I am so, so sorry. I was weak. I was a coward. I let her poison my mind, and I stood by while she hurt you. There is no excuse for what I did. None." He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking. The anger I had held onto for so long began to melt away, replaced by a deep, profound sorrow. "I hear your words, Mark," I said, my own voice quiet but strong. I would not offer easy absolution. He needed to understand the gravity of his actions. But trust is not a switch that can be flipped back on. It is built over a lifetime, and it was shattered in a single evening. You and I, we have a very long way to go." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life earning it back if you'll let me." He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at me, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not weakness, but a painful resolve. "I filed for divorce this morning," he said, the words clear and final. I can't be with a person who would try to destroy our family for money. I can't be the man who would let her. I looked at my son, truly looked at him for the first time in years, and beneath the shame and the exhaustion, I saw a glimmer of the honorable man I had raised. The hardness in my heart softened, replaced by a wave of maternal love that was as painful as it was powerful. "So," I asked softly, the single question that would define his future, "what will you do now?" 6 months later, I was sitting beside Ernest's bed, holding his hand and telling him everything. The air in the room no longer felt heavy with despair. I had seen to that. Sunlight streamed through a large window that overlooked a rose garden, and the soft strains of a cello, his favorite instrument, played from a small speaker in the corner. As I finished my story detailing the ruined Thanksgiving and the quiet rebirth that followed, I saw, for the very first time, the faintest hint of a smile touch his lips. It was a barely perceptible twitch, but to me, it was a sign of peace. My first act after the storm had been to honor him. Using the full authority he had vested in me, I had arranged for Ernest to be moved to the best private suite at Bright Meadows. I hired a dedicated nurse to be with him during the day and a music therapist to fill his silent hours with the melodies he had always loved. The wealth he had so carefully hidden was now being used for its intended purpose, to provide comfort and dignity. Mark was rebuilding. The question I had asked him on the porch that day, "What will you do now?" had become the cornerstone of his new life. He had sold the fancy car, moved into a small, modest apartment he could afford on his own, and had started seeing a therapist to understand the years of weakness and manipulation he had allowed. He was a constant presence, both at my side and at his father's. He would come to Bright Meadows and read to Ernest from the newspaper, his voice steady, a quiet act of penance and love. He came to my house not to ask for anything, but to give, to fix a leaky faucet, to help me with the groceries, to simply sit with me in the garden. The trust between us was a fragile new seedling, but it was being watered with honest actions, not empty words. The pain of what they had done, of what I had discovered, couldn't simply be erased, but I knew it could be transformed. With David Miller's help, I had taken the first steps to establish a small foundation in Ernest's name. We called it the Hayes Guardian Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing pro bono legal aid to seniors facing financial abuse from within their own families. Ernest's foresight would now become a shield for others who were not as fortunate as I had been. Last Saturday, Mark came over to help me in the garden. It was a warm spring day, the air sweet with the smell of freshly turned earth. We worked for hours in a comfortable silence, pulling weeds, pruning the old rose bushes, and planting new ones. For the first time in years, it felt easy, natural. The heavy curtain of lies and resentment had been lifted. He was no longer the conflicted man trapped between his wife and his mother. He was just my son, working beside me in the sun. As we packed up our tools, I looked at my son, his face smudged with dirt, his brow glistening with sweat, a genuine, easy smile in his eyes that I had not seen since he was a boy. I knew we had lost so much, years of trust, a sense of family innocence, a future we once thought was certain. But here, in the quiet aftermath, standing in the home we had fought to protect, I knew we had found something more important. We had found a quiet respect, an honest love, forged in the fires of a terrible truth. Ernest's legacy was safe, and I, at last, had found my own peace. As I turned the new key in the lock of my front door, the metallic click echoed like the final word in a long, painful chapter. I finally understood that protecting what you've built isn't selfishness. It's an act of self-respect. True family doesn't come with a price tag, and love should never be a negotiation. In the quiet peace of my own home, I realized that the strongest walls we can build are the boundaries we set to protect our own dignity. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand to protect your own peace?